Thanks, Neil, who's brought us to order here, though. Next up is Nicola Jacks, who's the family support worker for Beacon Counselling Trust. And as Neil mentioned in his opening remark, between 3 and 10 people are affected others by a problem gambler, or someone with gambling-related harm issues. So Nicola's going to tell us what Beacon is doing and how you can work with us on it.
Right, am I at the right height here? Thank you. And I think I kind of want to say, starting off, I'm so proud to be part of the family's work at Beacon. It means an awful lot to me, particularly. And actually this today and what we've heard so far is quite a defining moment because I think it shows where we were, what we've done and how far we've come, but where we can go next. And I think that's something that, as I say, for me, is massive to be part of. And I think I just kind of want to speak a little from the family heart's perspective. And it is, for me, family is valuable, it's precious, and it resonates with each and every one of us. Those connections, as David alluded to, they're so significant, not just for your well-being, but your stability and your actual whole life course. And when we sat down as a team to sort of discuss this conference, and I was thinking of all the ways I could sort of articulate that, bizarrely, Eddie will be happy about this one, I was thinking in visuals, and I was thinking of a precious family China tea set, and the idea of sort of transporting that from one home to a new one or a new location. And would we ever wrap up a single teacup and saucer, throw it in a box with the rest of it, and hope that it's all going to arrive at the next destination undamaged? And I think that's kind of defining of the work that we do in this whole family's approach, because we're not putting our care and attention just into one person. It's the importance of everything that comes along with that and what we do for those people as well, to get them to that next space in life and get them back to that stability and, you know, that easiness of a life course. And I think it's something that Alistair touched on when we now think particularly about our children in this world of instant gratification and oversaturation and overstimulation. They've got a few more chips and little dents in them already, so we've got to work even harder to make sure they're protected for that time. Oh, am I on there? There we are. So really, following on from what Lauren was talking about and what we do when people reach us for the first time and looking after that care of our service users, is that often they do come from a place of hurt. That juncture at that moment is all those things that you see up there. Gambling harms isn't just emotional, it's logical. And we have to break that down piece by piece when we're looking at the circumstances of these individuals' lives. One was trying to get them to step back into a place of trust rather than just control because of the chaotic nature of what they're experiencing at that time in their lives. So priority number one is health and wellness. It's being able to live your body in a state of easiness, that grounding. As David said, it's your relationships, and that's not just romantic or intimate, that's your family, that's your friends, that's your communities. And we know how that impacts, stretches across those spaces. One particularly for me in the financial and wealth element of it, it comes down to core beliefs and value systems around money. A lot of people will have to look at an entirely new financial blueprint to their whole lives, which in itself, given that money is emotional and not always logical as well, is really, really key. And then spirituality, which seems a bit of a strange one to say, but that's all about bringing people back into awareness. That's looking at your practices, your cultural beliefs, and encompassing everything within your core value systems and what works for you. Taking it right back to basics. So what do we see on the families that present to us at Beacon? As I say, it is that financial trauma. We don't sort of negate that. Having that sort of aspect of things not quite as they seemed. It could extend, obviously, to incurred debts, but loss of accommodations, actually looking at taking on multiple employment in order to kind of recoup what people do around debt and their feelings around debt, particularly where that hasn't been the nature of some of their own actions. Say health and well-being. So that post-traumatic regrowth that David alluded to before. And where you see where he's talking about sustainable recovery being around 5 years points, you can see where an individual or a family member learns about this for the first time. Actually, the extension of their lives this is going to feed into in some way or form. They're on day one. So that extension of 5 years might be 8, it might be 10, it might be 15, and particularly where we're thinking about children too, we're looking at that next generation. Emotional theft. So it's that idea of not having something that you thought you had, trying to challenge your own identity in a sense. People will often describe feeling like their partner was having an affair, or actually in some descriptions an affair would have been easier, given that level of hidden nature of what their their relationship status is like. Isolation. This is something that feeds massively into each and every one of particularly the mothers and partners of those experiencing gambling-related harms. David alluded again to the secondary stigmatisation. This is something we see an awful lot. The individual themselves don't think they own the rights to that other person's story in terms of their gambling, but they don't necessarily want to openly share that for reasons either with their own family members, with their own close friends, with their own communities, which means they're inwardly isolated to where they can have those conversations that are needed. And it really, really plays into a person's own identity of how they move forward with that, particularly where they might have circles around them that they were once so connected to. Guilt and shame, another one that, as I say, feeds very much within that space, thinking that you could have done something else or supported in a different way. Often we get things along the lines of, how did I not see it? What was I doing not to notice? Then, as I say, going forward, it's the supporting the household, not buying themselves things or restricting other life aspects because of the situation of the gambling harms. Loss of trust goes without saying. Loss of an idealised relationship. So again, this is that idea that something that you thought you had. We're looking at an episode of grief, shock and grief for these people who have this sense of what their life is or what it should look like, and actually the reality of that being quite different as the nature of the gambling-related harms, not the person. And then you might see, obviously, the lead to family breakdown, and as we go back to the very beginning of what we've been talking about today, that impact on on children. So what we have been doing at Beacon, obviously not just in terms of our sessional work with affected others from the very beginning of their journey with us, is actually that long-term provision and support that is so needed in this space. And we work really on category of needs. And I think one of the big things for us is that we're never prescriptive with this. While there are a lot of themes and correlations between the subjects, everyone's circumstances is completely different to them. So while I say we do our sessional work in breaking down some of the practical challenges, actually what a person has that reassurance is when they come to us is that we're there for the long haul, for whatever their need is and for however long they need us. And that's working with very much our partner organisations, particularly Bet No More and the Peer Aid programme in our, what we call our aftercare, but as I say, for the long term. And this is in order for that person, once they've got that awareness, is to give them an understanding of process. Okay, we strip everything back to basics, and actually with working with lived experience organisations, what you're providing for is an inspiration for continuing change, which, as David said, is a very important part of recovery capital. So what you have there is almost a map and system guide to that, sustainable recovery. It's not a magic wand intervention, it never is with gambling-related harms. I think what we like to say is you get to handle hard better, and that really feeds into kind of the resilience. And as I say, not only that, it's the connections and the onward community support that you build, and that's that quality of those relationships that can be quite life-defining for people we know in the space. Oh, that's jazzy. I wasn't expecting that. So for us, and it's been, say, from the very beginning, but it's extensive. It's no by means exhaustive. It is the circle of collaboration that we require in order to do this. We know we're good at what we do, and I don't mean to sort of be quite modest about that, but actually it's the importance of those relationships for us with those wider community networks and the support places we can access that will make a difference to our service users, say from day one. That's something, again, there's no wrong door policy, and really this is about people being able to have that choice of what works for them when. So if it's, say, going on our monthly walks with Trek Therapy, working with the Wordsworth Trust up in the Lake Districts, which I think has been a fulfilling and wonderful experience for all of us that have had the opportunity to do that. And obviously present that for our service users too, whether it's working with our peer supporters, whether it's working with the Forward Trust and their MPAT programme. This is something that we're kind of onwardly developing now, but again, with children very much in mind. But it's also thinking about all those other things that are connected to gambling-related harms that we're not the masters of, and we don't claim to be. We need those other third sector organisations, and we need them other support partners to step up and help us in this work. So if it's working with our domestic violence services, our debt charities, our legal services, which are still very, very unrepresented and, need some work to go through in terms of how we're supporting people who are impacted by areas of criminality. But also, going back to the recovery capital, looking at people's opportunities for work going forward. But that might change as people go through an identity change. So how do we support people in their work and career opportunities? How do we support people in their leisure and experience opportunities? And what actually might be their needs when it comes to rebuilding if you've lost a home, or you're starting again, or you're having to move locations? We're working with those organisations too, and we want them to come to us and, in our circle of collaboration, as I say. And there's obviously, as I say, this isn't exhaustive. This is some of the external and internal, but we are so well connected and so fortunate within this space, actually, as a sector, to have a lot of other lived experience organisations too. So if it's working with women's groups like Thriving Together, or it's Epic Restart Foundation, GamLearn, GamFam, those connections we're so fortunate to have, and we kind of say, come to us and utilise that too. So specifically about some of the work that I do, as I say, it is that familial relationship, looking at those communications, those pathways to help people start again, looking at the sort of more the advocacy matters where It's really eating into your time. One of the things people don't talk about is how gambling-related harms takes your time, not only for the individual themselves, but the family members who then have to look at rebuilding afterwards. Endless calls to bank, financial institutions, and recategorising, energies and all sorts. It's quite a life admin list to tackle, and it's quite a lot when you're going through the motions. So actually to have some support services like working with Citizens Advice Bureau, like working with PayPlan again, as I say, it just helps us ease that load for those people. So looking forward, as I say, again, and this is kind of where the request is coming back to some of you today, is that we know there's still work to be done. We know we're kind of, while we've done a lot, some of our systems are very, very infant in this space, and particularly in the relation with our children's and families programmes. We want people to start being more curious. It does start with that screening. It's about asking those questions. If you are working with family members or families on a regular basis, is there something to explore? Is there a conversation to be had? Can you just have the conversation anyway? We're not asking people now to transform the wheel of what they do. We're just asking for a wider shift in perspective. And I think that's quite simple to do. Because I think it's through that broader lens now, not just from the work that we're putting out there, that actually through our external stakeholder and partner work, that we can support that societal and cultural shift that's actually needed around gambling-related harms. So with MPAT, as I say, this is looking at the programme model that has been in existence in the drug and alcohol space for some time, and it's quite well known in that. We're running for the first time in sort of forward going a family programme here in the Merseyside district. So this is looking specifically at family interventions, which can take forms in multiple ways, in accordance for those that might be impacted, particularly for children and their guardians, children between the ages of 8 and 17, where you're most likely to see that kind of presence of a harm on their everyday life. For people that kind of want to know a little bit more about that and the work that we're kind of developing in that family space, please have a word with me afterwards. And we've got, I think, Andy and his team from the Forward Trust here today as well. So really, just to conclude for me, really, it's kind of going back to the questions that Neil was sort of saying at the beginning. We've kind of been spending some time building a jigsaw for quite some time. So we started by the corners, we're working inwards, and now we've got some solid foundations, but we know this is the area that we need to have that societal shift. We need to look at people that can start helping us with that early intervention, with that education, with that awareness. We talked about the Bet You Can Help programme earlier today, that upskilling, and Ian will talk a little bit more about that, it's time for people to step up. If we want something different in this space, we're all going to have to do something different. It can't come from one way all the time. And we can't operate in an echo chamber either. We know we have to work outside just our sector to build this interest. And I think it just to touch where Lauren finished before about the importance in and around lived experience, and where David was also talking about the giving back for those that have had some level of adversity when it comes to gambling-related harms. And there was a quote that sort of stood out to me, and I thought it was quite poignant. And it says, "Those brave enough to teach it heal their own heart." And I think that speaks a lot for those that come from a lived experience and are trying to put a little bit back in this sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we move straight on, and following on is Ian. Whiteside, who's going to talk about local systems. He's the education and early intervention manager, about mobilising local systems, which fits very nicely with where sort of Nicola finished about how we build local support for these programmes.
Thanks, Dave. And so far, this has been excellent. I hope this doesn't nosedive now I've got up. So, yeah, my name's Ian Whiteside. I'm the Early Intervention and Education Manager at Beacon. And first and foremost, I'm a youth practitioner. That's how I've spent most of my career. And I often talk about it when I do some kind of, whether it's a presentation or any form of education, I always think young people first. That's really important to me because it's kind of where my bread and butter was. But if I go back some years, and today is going to be a little bit different for me because I'm going to kind of touch on this theme, certainly in terms of engagement with all systems, but thinking about it from a personal point of view and a professional. And I often say to various people, I had no concept really of gambling as a youth worker, working with lots of young people, thousands in fact over the years. And it was until I was working in Knowsley, it was the Teenage Health in Knowsley programme asked me to do a piece of work on gambling. I said, I don't know anything about it. In fact, I don't see it. But that is a naivety. And if I was to reflect back and look at a youth club in an evening, I'd see young people on a PlayStation game saying, I'll bet you a fiver I can beat you in this game. So it is there. And then we think about, certainly from a cultural perspective in our city, you know, the Grand National in particular, how many children get help to put a bet on. You know, that's quite common. And it was only until I met Neil, he's over there, in a youth kind of focus group that was about supporting systems and various agencies coming together to change risk-taking behaviours. And it was at that point then really this started to become alive in sense of my knowledge. So moving on, we're going back, wrong one. Yeah, I've kind of termed this bit the parent and the professional. It'll make sense. Okay, so this is not something I often talk about, but I feel it's valid today. If you look, the young lady there in the police hat, she hasn't been arrested. That's my daughter. That picture was taken in 2012. That's April 2012. And leading up to that picture, I had 18 months, what I would say, a very traumatic part of my own life. It started with, I lost my mum, who herself had issues with alcohol, and it took her life. And at that time, it was probably the biggest area of my life where I felt I'd failed. I worked in drug treatment. I couldn't support my own mum. And it makes me feel a bit emotional because I don't often talk about it, but in 10 years, I'd never had a day off work. That was the only time I couldn't work. I had to go to the doctor and say, I feel like a failure. And what do we do going forward? But you have to. Several months later, we lost my mum's dad, my granddad. That was around about the Christmas time. And then within the year later, I'd broken up with my daughter's mother. Not so long after that, just before my 40th birthday, I lost my dad. So I had these 4 major significant losses in my life, and sometimes I wonder, how did I carry on? But I did, because of that little girl, because she's my purpose. She's kind of all I think about. And leading up to that picture, I thought, I don't want to fail with this. I felt like, you know, because I'd broken, the relationship had separated with the mum, I want to be the best dad I possibly can. So I was always looking for opportunities to do great experiences with her. And this picture is significant for me, really, because I don't know if anyone's noticed, but where do you think this picture's been taken? Yeah, I took it to Aintree Racecourse. Now, I know people are laughing there, but actually I thought I was quite cool. I thought this was, in some kind of weird way, I thought my ex-partner would see that as a, wow, in some way of a reconciliation. She might look at me differently. I took her to Aintree Racecourse. I did all the things I wouldn't encourage anyone to do now. I let her hold the race card. I let her pick the horses. I kind of floated around. All the people kind of, oh, look at this little girl. She stood out on her own because no one else was there in terms of with children. I thought this was kind of cool thing to do and a fun thing to do. But actually, when I reflect back, I had no knowledge this was that naivety. I would not encourage anyone to be doing this now, because certainly we know an early exposure to gambling and all the things that I'd gone through, I recognised there was wider determinant issues there for me. Now, thankfully for me, I always had a very healthy fear of gambling, so I didn't progress this and kind of, it was much more of a recreational issue, but it could have been different based on the things that happened in my life. Also, we won. So that early win, that significant win, we won enough money that I paid for the whole day. We took her mum out for a Chinese restaurant afterwards, and she got a rig out with all new clothes and toys, and I spent it on her. But I do often think about, this is something that often many of us don't see in our own lives, but it's around us, it sits there. We just don't take notice necessarily. And the important thing about this conference today is to take notice and to start putting things into our own practice where we wouldn't have considered gambling. We need to. So, from the professional point of view, some people will be familiar with this document. So, the Working Together to Safeguard Children. This document is produced to give guidance to local areas. So, it's the responsibility of the local authority, ICBs, integrated care boards, and the police to formulate what we call a descriptions of need plan, a kind of guidance to practitioners so that they understand what are the levels of need that children and families have, difficulties in their existence, where we can support them. And often some people will see that within that guidance, and it's familiar with lots of people's, local areas will have a level of needs document, and it kind of spells out in there all the various elements and factors where we need to be looking at. And if you look at that from a child developmental needs kind of point of view, that's around health and education being quite key, the things we kind of expect, but then certainly from a parenting capacity, what's going on with a parent that might be influencing some difficulties in that family household and impacting the child. And again, from a family and environment point of view, all the kind of things that we know can be difficult in a family's kind of situation where we may need to make an intervention. Now, in that document, and it's fairly, recently been reproduced, there's not one single mention of gambling at all, and it's 168 pages. And, this is something if you know me, you'll know I'll talk about this a lot. I would really love to see this change, because as a practitioner, as a youth worker, I didn't see it. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we do have to be explicit about these things to be asked. And if I think about child exploitation and ACEs in particular, these weren't in our common language until we were told about them and encouraged to learn about them and embed them into our practice. So from a levels of need point of view, and this one's from Lancashire, so I quite like this one because it's very descriptive. It looks at those various levels. So from a universal level, straightforward education. And we do that. We do that in some of our young people's work, going into schools and youth groups to teach about, gaming and gambling. And then certainly from my own practice, before I came to work for Beacon, I worked for St Helens Youth Justice Service as part of the drug and alcohol team. And again, one of the things we used to talk about a lot there was how do we support young people, looking for things like, how do you fund your drug use? Are we worried about child exploitation? But no mention of gambling. As a practitioner doing early help plans, it wasn't included, and it still isn't included in any of this document. And as you go forward, whether there's extra need, there's child in need issues, whether there's other services involved, or from a child protection point of view, a children and family assessment doesn't include gambling in its document. Now, I've looked last couple of weeks everywhere to see, can I find gambling anywhere? And I'm not, this isn't a criticism, this is an observation. Today is about looking at the gaps and trying to, kind of fix these gaps. The only one I could find was Sefton's. It's the only document I could find, certainly in Merseyside and wider, that had any reference to gambling or gaming. So well done, Sefton, for having that in there. And I would congratulate them, actually, because only fairly recently I went to the ACES network in Sefton. And from that, we've now started to put things in motion where Sefton have included gambling as a screening question, so we're seeing change. And this is like, brilliant for me. In the next month or so, we'll be training the entire Family Hub team, so North, South and Central. And I know Leanne's in here somewhere, so thank you to her. She's been great about moving that on. So it's really important that we get this happening. Dave talked earlier on about a a 10-point plan. Actually, I've recognised it myself. It should be in there too, and we haven't really, we talk about early intervention and screening, but I would like to be explicit also about putting it within the early help kind of framework. So we will, keep kind of mentioning the 10-point plan, and it's in those centre pages of your stakeholder documents. We want you to look at them, read them, and ask yourself, what from that 10-point plan, key issues could you build into your practice or your organisation? So what do we do in terms of our early intervention work going forward to address some of these issues? And the 10-point plan is a really good starting point. Everyone will know, or some people will, that we've kind of created a range of initiatives that looks at gambling-related harm. And again, going from the youth workers' point of view, if you haven't got a youth offer, I'd question what is your offer? Because without that, we're talking about prevention. If we don't think about young people first, just really struggle with it. But thankfully, working with GamCare and the Young People's Gambling Harms Prevention Programme, we do have a very good offer. And whether you're a youth worker or a school, you can get free education. We can go in and do some work there. If you're a youth practitioner, again, there's specific training for you. We developed a programme some years ago now called Breaking the Shadow, loosely translated Breaking the Shame. So working with the South Asian community, seen as a more vulnerable group. But actually we're moving that on now to a more diverse communities-led piece of work, because we recognise it's not just South Asians that are having issues with gambling. So only last week, and I was telling Neil, actually worked with a group, a Nigerian community that are based in Manchester. And it was very interesting because some of the things they were talking about was about spirits invading the body and causing addictions, and that kind of thing. We need to educate, we need to look at those things, because there's misconceptions about what addiction is. Nicola's talked about the family's work and our impact, so I'm not going to go on about that. And again, Dave has mentioned a lot about the workplace charter, but I would say fundamentally, if you think about it, we said about 85% of organisations have got a drug and alcohol policy, about 5%, 10% if we're lucky, I've got a gambling arms policy. That's not right, that needs to change. And then working with criminal justice, and there's good reflections of the work we've been doing in the stakeholder booklet. And it mentioned by Emily Spittle, we're working closely with Merseyside Police in particular, but all our police authorities across the North West to help those practitioners understand where gambling may be a factor when someone presents in custody. And then more recently, we're doing some work with our armed forces community, and there's information today, you can find out more about that. So it gives you a flavour of some of the initiatives that we've been doing. And as I say, if you're interested in the Young People's Programme, it's kind of what I always come back to because I'm a youth worker, you can go and find out more about that programme via the GamCare website. You can download fact sheets. There's really useful things there about talking to young people, starting a conversation. But the biggest thing is get in touch with us and we'll come and do some work with you. Yes, the workplace charter again, I just want to kind of focus a little moment on that, is that this for me is the game changer. I see one of our best initiatives really, and I'm not sure how many organisations are here today, but I would love people to go away and email me next week or Dave and say, we are interested in this, because it's not difficult to do. And at the end of the process, it's about changing culture, training, developing policy. But what it also does is it recognises the good effort that you've put in. So it's not a standard, but it's a recognition that you are doing something positive in your practice. So please think about the workplace charter. We've had heaps and heaps of organisations, go through this process. What you can see there is some. I'd like to times that by 10. So please, think about that. Coupled with all our work, and I'm getting close to my time, is our Bet You Can Help programme, our flagship training offer. And as it mentions there, we do focus on those kind of key groups, those target groups that we have more concerns with because of their vulnerabilities. So the Bet You Can Help programme is the only accredited programme in the UK. So you can do a full day programme, which is a level 2 award in tackling gambling related harm, accredited by the Royal Society of Public Health. Or if you don't have the time, you can do Bet You Can Help Now, which is a 1.5 hour session. So if you've never had any gambling harms training before, please, this is maybe your time to think about it. Often when we do any training, myself or any other colleagues, we say, have you received training like this before? Often we get no, never. So think about that. Lots of successes with that programme. You get a nice certificate when you complete it. We've seen, and this is just in our area, but if you think about some of our partners within the NGSN and ARA in particular, and RCA Trust, they've been delivering this programme too. So I'm actually not sure how many people we've engaged with, but there's probably thousands upon thousands. That programme is independently evaluated by GRIO, which is the Gambling Research Exchange on Ontario, and only recently we had a marvellous report. This was coming from participants. You know, so it's nice to know that they're getting something from it in terms of their feedback. And it was a little moment for us. I remember Graham and Neil, we went to London to receive a Vixio Award. Because a part of the programme in Bet You Can Help it looks at key themes. So depending on the audience, we will tailor-make something to that key group. Because we'd worked with the South Asian community, they recognised that that was an area of excellence. So we thankfully received an award for that. And if there's one thing I would just leave you with before I sit back down is, you know, think about that moment for me when I just didn't understand. We don't know what we don't know. I didn't then. I do now. And I think it's time for everybody, really, in my opinion, to start kind of thinking this should be included in our work. So let's get it in there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. It's just a little one.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Ian, for that and for sharing your own personal experience as well. I think it made me suddenly think about loading up my kids with pennies and taking them to the slot machines when they were younger, and thankfully nothing has come of that. But again, it's how many of us do those sorts of things without thinking about the implications of it as well. So thank you. And just to also perhaps plug the Workplace Charter for those of you who've not had a look at it before. The Workplace Charter makes a commitment as an employer to supporting your workforce and obviously by implication their families in this process as well. So it's actually a demonstration of commitment that's very important. Okay, next speaker up is Colin Hughes, who's going to come up here and talk about what's going on in Blackburn. And I have to say, I think, Colin, you are one of the leaders in this field as a local authority in terms of the work that you're doing. And thank you very much for the support that you've given to Beacon during that process as well.
Thanks, David. Afternoon, everybody. First of all, absolutely a million thanks for being a chance to come and speak about the work we're doing in Blackburn and Darwin. And it's all built on the back of the relationship we've had with Beacon Counselling Trust, you know, with Lauren, James, Ian, Neil, over 7 years ago when I was working in drug treatment services. And that's my background. I've worked for over 20 years in drug treatment services before coming into public health. So it's safe to say I've been exposed and seen a lot of things that you've heard spoke about today around the power of recovery, in particular missed opportunities. But I also think for myself around why wouldn't we look at families and when we're looking at individuals who need our support and help. And it's just really a bit of a snapshot about our journey in Blackburn with Darwin today, because it's by no means, I would say, the best model, and because we don't know what that looks like. We kind of been working along and trying to find our feet as we've been on this journey. Some great learning, great opportunities, some great outcomes, it must be said as well. But, you know, as a borough in Blackburn with Darwin, it's something I think we really need to focus on. And apologies in advance that this presentation is also available in other accents, and as I'm from Lancashire, some of them sentences might fall a little bit short. There might be some words missing, but there we go, that's Lancashire. So why are we focusing on gambling related harms in Blackburn with Darwin? You can see yourself there, we're very much a diverse community. You know, over 37% of our community is South Asian. You can see just from the notes on there the levels of deprivation in our borough. Lots of opportunities, I would say, in that as well. But I think the striking thing for me is that we've got the 5th, 6th youngest population in the country. A whole heap of young people in our communities in Blackburn with Darwin are what we would class at risk of harm in one way, shape or form. And for me, it's why we should be looking at this. And it's why we've taken it on as a public health measure in the borough. Because I think, coming from drug treatment service, for me, the language has always been think family, family focus. And it's why we've got a real kind of focus on this and supporting families and children around that. But you can see from the little town on the end of the M65, lots of challenges ahead of us. But as I said there, I think for me as well, lots of opportunities. And it's a priority as well. It fits under our corporate plan. It fits under our new health and wellbeing strategy around mental and physical health and wellbeing. And you might hear me say a lot this afternoon around I, and it's a phrase I want to move away from, because I want to move to a we, because I think it's not about the system at the moment. It's more about individuals leading it. But I'll come to that in a little bit time. So what have we been doing? I attended a conference over 2 years ago. Cumbria had a bit of a conference, and there was an opportunity there that the Royal Society of Public Health had been doing the partnership work around gambling and around the community in charge of gambling, built on the back of a community in charge of alcohol project down in Manchester, where the level 2 training, 2 days of training aimed at practitioners, a level 2 qualification. But for me, we had no services in Blackburn with Darwin. It was always an approach of, can we put boots on the ground? Can we get people out there in our communities, linking into the strength-based assets we have in our community to get people informed, educated, raise that awareness, and almost remove some of that stigma. And I think for those who are here today familiar with drug and alcohol services, we've fought stigma for years and years around being able to support people. But what it was for me, it was a door opener. First of all, it was an introduction to Beacon Counselling Trust, a relationship that's been really dear to us in Blackburn and with the Royal Society of Public Health. And over the last 2 years, we've been fortunate enough to train, well, now 31 people, because our last 2 got their qualifications last week. But what it means is we've got people in really important places and organisations that can have that conversation with people and start to embed it. And Neil said this morning, it's more about the can-do. I can sit here all day, and as you will do yourselves, about the can't-dos and the challenges, and there's so many of them. But there's also a lot of can-dos. And for me, that's the approach we've taken. Where can we embed this discussion, this awareness, this opportunity in organisations where we're likely to see it? And I think by the work we've done around the Level 2 award and the gambling in charge of gambling programme, it's allowed us to open doors and almost make it a conversation that people can have them conversations. And certainly, not over 18 months ago, Nicola and I had a few exchanges of emails about a family that was experiencing some challenges and some harm. And the local borough response was to move this woman out of the borough, if you remember, Nicola, which was moving it away from, going back to David's conversation before, where them assets are, that recovery, that strength was. And it was a whole wrong approach to take, because it involved moving the young person away from their education, where that network was, the family away from the wife away from the family. And it made me think about why we really should be going along a family approach. So we've completed this training. It's been a door opener. It allowed us to get a step on the ladder. And I think it's led on to this next stage here. Like I say, it's nothing, I would say, dramatic, but it's something that it's allowed us in Blackburn Darwin to get a foothold. So we've done targeted training aimed at services, and in particular, our social services, so our adult and social care and children's social care. As you can see from there as well, we have a system in Blackburn with Darwin that's creaking at the moment under the pressure on children's social care and adult social care. And it means creaking. And we're seeing more and more families and young people come into that system. So why should we not be educating the people who are working in that system to have that awareness? Are we going to get it on an assessment at this point in time? No, we're not. But it doesn't mean we can't have the conversation and know the pathways where that support is. So that's been our approach on educating the professionals. And I'm pleased to say from the training we've done, through either bite-sized sessions that James has delivered, or through the day one or the day-long one, on top of those individuals who've been through the level 2, with over 100 people now who've accessed that training and can have that conversation and are better informed to be able to go out and support people. We commissioned the Drug and Alcohol Service, and naturally I'm always going to move and kind of navigate to that community, because I believe that's where we have a lot of prevalence rates. And we've had scoping exercises in the drug treatment service where James and I have spent a day there speaking to people who are coming in for treatment, people who are into recovery, coming out of treatment, and working across some of our HMOs. We have a large HMO population in Blackburn with Darwin, so we have a lot of hostels and a lot of people who are there who have been moved into there. And I think that's really important, because it's allowed us to look at a different dynamic in terms of where people's needs are and embedding gambling-related harms in their communities. And some of the conversations we had were quite eye-opening around people who are in treatment saying, well, no, I've come into drug treatment because I used to have a gambling addiction, but that's what led me to drug and alcohol use. And then saying, like, I just have a bet at the weekend, and we're like, you've gone back into the same behaviour. And it was really eye-opening for James and myself to see where some of this harm may exist. We've also been able, in the Borough from GambleAware, 2 of our local services have been funded by the Community Resilience Fund by GambleAware. So Food Bank is one of our services that over 3,000 people come through the doors at our food bank, and they're all being asked a question, being screened around any gambling-related harms. And I always think back to the programme that Citizens Advice did years ago, the Ask project, asking people around domestic abuse, where there's an opportunity, ask the question. And then one of our other local organisations, predominantly working with our South Asian population, are trying to work alongside some of the mosques and the places of worship, where we know then conversations, going back to Brixham, are really challenging, and trying to break down some of them, that stigma and barriers. There's been a real big focus on partnership building. And one of the things we are proud of is the multi-agency gambling-related harms forum that we have a quarterly meeting, where we've managed to pull together organisations from both not only the private sector but public services and our third sector partners as well, to open that discussion and see where we can support each other and work together to make sure it's embedded in Blackburn with Darwin. More recently, we've actually funded a post in our local drug and alcohol service based on some of the initial work that James and I did. And what that will look like for the next 12 months is we've got somebody in the service that when people come into treatment, it's now part of that triage assessment. It's now built into the full assessment. And for the 850 to 875 people that are in that service at one time, that question is going to be asked. That's over 800 people more that were going to be asked that question. And it's also going to link into our recovery community. So for people coming out of treatment, we know that some of them people still have them challenges, have been in recovery, to ask that question, and also across our vulnerable population. And for the poor soul that's delivering that project, he's asking that question, he's working with staff as well, and then opening up them pathways to support. But that's something that we feel there's a prevalence rate in there that we want to identify and lead us to where we need to go. And very much about our young people work as well. We really are young people focused in the borough. We're one of the few areas, I think, that still has a very active youth community. We've got a young person service with big investment. And with a population, as we've noted, with so many young people, why would we miss that opportunity to work with young people and their families to see what it is? And it's not just about educating young people around the risk of gaming. These young people are also part of that hidden harm picture where parents or carers or significant others in that family may be having gambling harm. But our big piece of work that I want to share with you today, that might also be a door opener for some of you, is around our gambling needs, harms needs assessment. We've commissioned Glasgow University in partnership with the University of Sheffield to have a look at, so we've seen the GambleAware prevalence estimates, we've seen the latest figures from All Hid as well, but we want to have a more in-depth look about what does that mean for Blackburn and Darwin as a place. What does that prevalence look like? What are them determinants? And from a wider determinants perspective of harmful gambling, why aren't people coming forward and talking, asking, where does it exist in them communities? What are the people's views and the stakeholders? And them stakeholders has to include the people who are affected others, people who are experienced the harm, the people who are supporting them as well. And Glasgow University are now just coming to the end of phase 1. And what phase 1 is in, it's been a desktop research that's allowed them to look at where some of this exists, look at what we have in Blackburn with Darwin, work alongside some of the partnerships we have. And only yesterday I had a catch-up with Glasgow, and from our estimates in terms of our harms, our risk, is that 9,041 adults are what we are classed experience risk at this moment in time in Blackburn with Darwin, and that's adults 18 plus. So if you think from a family focus, family approach, whatever title you want to give it, some of them are sons, daughters, parents, brothers, sisters. The wider impact that can have on the family is huge. So the 9,000 is a starting point. If you add one more family member into that, and our learning we've had, you can see the reach and where them levels of harm may be. Our phase 2 will be workshops in the borough in Blackburn with Darwin, where we're working with the partners for them to understand more about this, but listen to their feedback. What are food banks seeing for the people coming through their doors? What are our other organisations experiencing? And it's all with the purpose of supporting them. And that's the key thing for us. We're on a journey and learning. Just as I move on to the last one, and I thought this, I was laughing and joking about it, but I think it's really relevant because it does feel like we're almost a magician pulling a rabbit out of the hat at the times, trying to make things work without, I would say, any real framework or infrastructure. And the things that we really want to focus on are we need to keep raising that awareness of gambling-related harm. It's really important we embed this across our services, across our communities, remove that stigma and tell people it's all right to come forward and access support and help. It's important that we expand our network across there, but I don't just mean for Blackburn and Darwin as a place, but across the ICS as well. Our learning, our experiences could influence Lancashire, Blackpool, South Cumbria and wider, and we're happy enough to share that. But it's got to become a systematic approach. There's a lot of eyes in this work we're doing at the moment, and we need to make it part of a system. I mentioned there about embedding discussion and screening as best practice. We know it's a challenge to get the screening in place and onto assessments because they're getting bigger and bigger. But we can have that discussion. We can ask them 3 and 4 really important questions that can just leave a message with someone to pick up the phone or have a referral or have a chat or a conversation, whatever way you want to look at it, to help them to support it. And I'm a real advocate, and David, honestly, superb this morning around recovery capital. We've got a huge strength-based asset in our borough in Blackburn with Darwin, really recovery focus. We changed our drug and alcohol treatment model to focus more around sustainable recovery. You know, treatment's really important, but look at the assets that are in there. In Blackburn, we've got a really strong third sector. We've got a really strong public sector. Working together will be the key for us moving forward. And finally, no surprise for anybody, is it? It's about finding money. Money does help, whichever way you look at it. You know, we've been lucky to access a few funds that were left over, but should that really be the way of doing things? Accessing a few funds that are left over, it should be an investment. This is a public health issue. And whilst we're talking about public health, because I work in public health, 12 months ago in Liverpool, I asked this same question. So it'd be interesting to see if it's changed in 12 months. Down the road at Aintree today, and if somebody's made familiar, there's a 2-day national alcohol conference. I know that directors of public health are in attendance. So last time I spoke at Liverpool, I asked a question before I got off stage. Can all directors of public health please put their hand in the air? So as a measure of my call meter, can all directors of public health please put their hand in the air? And there, ladies and gentlemen, I think is part of the problem. We need to embed this. My thoughts are, this is in public health, but it's not embedded in public health. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Colin. And for those of you who work in local authorities, we'd be very pleased to talk to your Director of Public Health and support them at any point in this process as well. Okay, thank you very much, Colin. Great work going on in Blackburn and Darwin. I'd like to introduce Frankie Graham now, who's going to come up and speak. Frankie is the Chief Executive of Bet No More, and Frankie's going to talk on reflections from Bet No More lived experience team, and he has 2 colleagues with him, Julie and Josh, who are going to come up and tell us what is going on in there. Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the Beacon team for inviting us to talk with you today, and for putting on this amazing event. I mean, 10 years ago when Bet No More was launched, outside of a small bubble, nobody was talking about gambling. And yet here we are today, listening to these fantastic presentations. I think what we're learning is we need a societal public health response to gambling. This is not a one charity issue. It ripples into every aspect of everybody's life. So we're really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today and give you a window into what that lived experience of gambling-related trauma looks like. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Martin. I work for Peer Aid. I'm a coordinator with the Aftercare programme in partnership with Beacon.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh. I am the Gambling Outreach and Living Support worker, and I also do some co-hosting with Julie on the Aftercare project.
So what we'd like to do this session is give you a little bit of colour, a little bit of background, context into the experiences that we have all had in relation to our gambling problems, and then open up to the floor the opportunity for you guys to ask questions, and feel free to ask anything that's on your mind. It's absolutely fine. So, Julie, do you want to start?
Yeah. I've actually found today a lot more emotional than I thought I was going to find it. And I think it's because I come from over 20 years of lived experience of gambling harm. It was my husband who was the gambler through all of our marriage. And it became very prevalent when our children were about 6 and 10. They are now 19 and 24. So to hear about the whole family approach is really important to me. It's very special that we encompass the whole family. I've worked for a number of years in this sector now, and I've worked with people in recovery or people who are affected others, but I've never genuinely thought about them as families because they're always individuals. If I just spend a little bit of time telling you about my lived experience, and the reason I choose to share mine so much is because it started probably about 15, 16 years ago. So when the help wasn't out there that's out there now, when all the amazing work the Beacon and Bet No More and everybody else do wasn't there. As I said, my children were about 6 and 10 when I first found out about my husband's gambling issues. At that point, we were already so far in debt. We had no money at all. I couldn't buy food. I didn't tell anyone. There was the shame. There was the stigma. How could I go to my parents? You know, we'd both worked. We'd bought our own home. We'd had 2 lovely children. I was brought up I knew nothing about gambling. How could I go to them and say, that man I married, the man I love, the man I want to spend the rest of my life with has absolutely gambled away every penny we've ever had and more, much, much more. So for many years I kept it a secret. It had effect on my mental health. It had effect on the children's mental health for all the reasons we've talked about today. The arguments, the worry, the stress, everything, the sleepless nights. Unfortunately, as much as I did try to get him help over the years, and we're talking about a 10-year span of on and off gambling and relapses, he never chose to get the help that was out there during that time. I did my own research and looked into what gambling was, what it wasn't as an addiction, and tried my best to help the kids and me on my own. It came to a point, and I will jump because of time, that after being 10 years living through lockdown, which was the worst point, where the gambling became absolutely 12 hours a day, every day, along with drinking alcohol, that we then had the worst year of our lives, because then, unfortunately, I was subjected to some verbal and domestic abuse. My son was 16, going into GCSE years. My daughter had come home from university. They were seeing their dad fall apart and their mum fall apart, to be fair. And it got to a point where my son had to separate us one day because my husband had lost his temper and I wasn't giving him a bank card that he wanted. And he was arrested, unfortunately, and it led to our separation. Then at that point, again, we're talking about domestic abuse charities, the police, the criminal justice system. I told them all he had gambling issues, every single one of them, time and time again, and not one of them picked up on that. In fact, the only thing they gave him was a 10-week anger management course. Unfortunately, we lost him to a gambling-related suicide in November of 2021. And as Nick rightly said, we carry on now, or I carry on now doing this work because I feel it's my recovery. My family are a work in progress. We've all had to reach out and get various different types of therapy, which I'm very pleased and proud that we all have. The kids are doing really well. I'm so proud of them every day. And very much like Ian said, I could have given up. There's days that I did not want to get out of bed. There's days I did not want to keep on. But for them, what choice did I have? One parent had already left them. I certainly wasn't going to do it too. So I love the work that I do now. I love the progress that I'm seeing within the sector now. We're always moving forward, always working hard. And I look forward to doing a lot more work with Beacon in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. I know that's difficult to share, and we've always got the utmost respect for anybody that's sharing in the pursuit of helping others, so thank you. We've heard a lot today as well about the childhood experience, and I was particularly taken, for example, by Alistair's presentation, because the gambling industry is always 5 years ahead of us. So we have to always look down the road, and I think part of the problems we've had in the gambling treatment and support sector is that we've always been firefighting. You know, we've always been looking over our shoulder. We need to start looking forward. So I think that kind of help by bringing different stakeholders into the space and giving us the intel to be able to start to plan is so vital. But that early exposure to children, it happened to me. I experienced childhood exposure to gambling and the subcultures of betting shops, and it led to a 20-year problem. So these problems do start in childhood, the seeds are sown, and as you go through into adolescence, into adulthood, unless you have that intervention early enough, these problems can stay with you and become a lifelong problem. So I'd just like to now reintroduce you back to Josh.
Hi everyone. So gambling for me was quite conscious of time here. It was introduced as a fun thing, much like you mentioned, sort of picking the horses, Grand National, sort of what we do. I had no knowledge on horses. I just liked the names, so that's kind of how I would do it. But it's something my family would do every year, and that's sort of how that was my only version of gambling. However, my mum would always go bingo, but to me that wasn't gambling because it wasn't in a bookies, and that is what gambling was to me. Growing up, she'd always go to the bingo, and it was a regular part, sort of weekend thing, until we got, I think we got it for a Christmas present, like an iPod. You could download games, so online betting, and it was still relatively new. There wasn't a lot of sites you could go on, but there was still enough that you could gamble. And so for reference, my dad is an alcoholic. So growing up, it was always me and my mum. And there became a point when I was about 12 where she became distant. Still present, so we'd be in the same house, we'd be in the same room, watching a film together, but she was on her phone. There was no looking up. If we went to the seaside for the day, I'd get given money to go off in the arcades and do what I wanted to do. But I knew no matter what had happened, there could be an earthquake, my mum would always be by the fruit machine. So I never worried about losing her because she would be there. And again, going back to the sort of the magic of gambling as a child, not understanding it, if I got down to my last pound because I'd go on the racing games and whatever, I could go back to my mum, she would put it in a magical machine and she'd give me more money. That was a fruit machine, for reference. It was only as an adult I found out she very rarely won. She just happened to have money in her hand, and if she gave it to me, I'd go away for a bit. So I was about 14. My mum come to pick me up from school, and she said that we weren't going to a family friends that we'd spend every weekend at, that I'd grown up with for years. And I assumed she wasn't well, or there was a reason. And then my mum told me that she had a gambling problem. Not having any knowledge of gambling, never seeing my mum go to a bookies, that couldn't be real, that didn't exist. And she told me that through her desire to gamble, she had committed fraud on the family friend that we had spent weekends at and that I'd grown up with. And that was obviously the reason we couldn't go. So my mum had then handed herself into the police and was on bail for a period of 10 months or pending investigation and stuff. During this time, obviously the house was searched by the police and stuff like that. And then the family, you know, rightly very angry. There was elements of abuse. There was threats on my life, my family's life. And again, I was only 14 at this point, and hadn't actually done anything. So after the 10 months of being on bail, my mum was then sentenced to 26 months in prison. Sorry about that. It's always the moment for me there. And yeah, so through my whole sort of year 11 period, my GCSEs, I didn't have my mum. My dad was an alcoholic. They'd split up when I was about 12. So, in several ways, I did have, fortunate enough I had a stepdad. who had only been in my life for 2 years at that point, and was then sort of left, in charge of me. So that was my sort of experience from that. And then come back to, everyone sort of mentioned it today about the breakdown of trust. And so my mum did her sentence. Fortunately, just before she went away, she reached out for help from Frankie, and was able to get that. But coming back out, she had been out of prison for about a month and was arrested again for fraud against the same family. It was another allegation for a separate bank account, different amount of money. Now, instantly, because of the breakdown of trust, you've done it. There's no, I don't understand this now, you've done this. And she was on bail for 3 years for that before she was able to prove it wasn't her, and that one had nothing to do with her. But that's 3 years of no trust in the family, constantly sort of doubting yourself, doubting the person who's meant to care for you, because now you feel like the parent, like, I can't trust you to go here on your own. If you're on your phone too much, why are you on your phone? What are you doing? So I think for me, there was no education around it. I discovered gambling after she'd gone away from myself. And quite often I get asked, when did you realise your mum had a problem? And she'd been out of prison for about 2 years before I went, she had a gambling addiction, because growing up there was no education around it and I had no support. There was no children's charities that were going to tell me about anything. So all I had was school counselling, which helped kids with exam stress, and she had no knowledge on gambling or prison. So I think it's that firm belief that there needs to be that early education and just that awareness of what things are, and as well as the support there.
Thank you so much, Josh. Again, really powerful. So with the time left, I'd just like to open up to the floor, and if anybody has any questions about the lived experience narratives or anything else they've heard today. Both these guys now work for Bet No More. They work in collaboration with Beacon, really powerful new services that we're forming together. So anything at all that may be on your mind, please do not be afraid to ask. Alistair?
Sure. What would you say is the sort of most common age range for young people that are being affected by the family? I know that it affects everyone at all ages, but when we're looking at, say, 14-year-olds as an example, a third of all school suspensions happen when you're 14, so it's a particularly tumultuous time. Where does it seem the most prevalent for you guys?
If you look at the age range of probably of adults of about 25 to maybe 39, they may be male or female, but that's quite an age range for gambling. They have usually, not always, got partners, wives, husbands, and they will have had children by that point. So they could be as young as 2 years old. I know I do peer support with people who have very young children. So I don't think there is, as an affected other, I don't think there is an age range. From the work that we've done, it was 11 years old and up that could be affected because of advertising, games and things like that. But I think that's getting even younger now as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think obviously in the last decade we've seen the emergence of gaming, which has a lot of synergy with gambling. So there's gambling characteristics that are built into the game. But as I said earlier, I think the industry's 5 years ahead of us always. So whatever's out there today, I mean, that's why I was very grateful for your presentation, particularly because we need to know what's out there, what these subcultures are forming in the virtual world, which some of us oldies don't have access to. Because in 5 years, unfortunately, these kids may be knocking on our door. So we really do need to understand where the direction of travel is, what type of problems are being developed now, so we can start preparing.
Thank you.
Ian?
Yeah, frankly, we're going through a massive period of change with the new Gambling Act that's coming into place. If you three guys had one wish that would happen, what would that be?
More money. I think just starting to work in collaboration, Ian. I think today's a fantastic example of what can be achieved if you put the politics to one side and agree this is such an important and dangerous issue to our society, to our communities, to our families, to the individual, that we have to work together, because if we don't, as we've seen and heard today, the danger is it's horrendous.
Personally, I think mine would be advertising. Any advertising, television, radio, whatever. I'd like to see it at least after the 9 o'clock watershed.
I think for me personally, I'd like to see more early education, some more stuff being done from a base level in terms of schools. It's great when you have organisations that will go into schools and give talks, and I think that's brilliant work, but it shouldn't necessarily be on those organisations to do that. I think it should be embedded. Certainly when I was at school, we learned about drugs and alcohol, but we never learned about gambling. So I'd say early education for me.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie and Josh, there for sharing that with us. And I think one of the things that has come through as a theme is about the whole question of awareness and people not realising the journey people are going on, and people not spotting that something's happening, whether it's teachers in school, whether it's GPs, whether it's other health workers, whether it's people that people are contacting in the community for other things, whether it's housing, debt, benefits, etc. And that whole building people's awareness is really important, I think. I personally was not aware. I was chairman of a mental health trust and was not aware of gambling as an issue. When I became aware through work with Neil and that, and I went to my clinicians and said, what do we do around gambling harm? They said nothing. We're not commissioned to do it. It's not in our remit. So I said, well, do we screen for it? No. In fact, right up until a couple of years ago, the Trust's services out in the community did not screen for gambling issues. And I would be willing to bet money, and that, I know that's a very inappropriate thing to say in an event like this, that very few NHS trusts that have community-based services are actually doing that. And our work with GPs and GP practices, I think, is demonstrating that GPs are suddenly aware of it as an issue and they'll do something, but they need to be made aware and they need to see that it's something that's important for their local area. And unfortunately, some of that will come back to evidence-based. Some of that will come back to the important work that Colin's doing in Blackburn and Darwin, and Nadia was talking about where there's evidence that there is harm going on. That's the thing that we also need to build, and it would be lovely if people could be convinced before that, and I hope that you will go out and spread that word and do as much as you can to get people working so that we don't have to sort of pile up the bodies, so to speak, before we get action. We're actually working earlier. Okay, the next, we continue with the theme of lived experience, and the next speaker is David Quinty. I should have probably gone back there. David Quinty, who is a lived experience advocate with Beacon Counselling Trust. And David's going to talk about his experience and how it's affected him and how he hopes to the work that he now does will contribute to more people becoming involved and services developing in the appropriate way. So,
good afternoon. My name is David Quinty. I just want to share this video about my own lived experience journey. Unfortunately, I can't be at the conference today. I was supposed to speak, but I just wanted to sort of share, and hopefully this will help or resonate with people. So basically, I had a gambling addiction for probably 15 to 20 years, mainly sports betting. Started off small like everybody, ended up online. Towards the end, betting on roulette, red or black, no real skill. Probably lost a total of 30,000, probably more, cards, different things, accounts. This today is not really about my story as such, but it's kind of it will resonate. It's a part of what happened to me and a part, I suppose, that made me stop. When I was gambling, I had no idea that anyone knew. I was just started going into it, then obviously got worse. My days became full of gambling, but even then I tried to keep up appearances. I tried to go to work, I tried to attend events, go out, be with my family, and as far as I was aware, no one knew. I was trying to just be normal. Even though they call it the invisible addiction, as far as I was concerned, that's the way it was. I wasn't going to tell anyone because I was scared as to what would happen, who would find out, the impact of that, the stigma. So it was quite revealing when it was that actually my son, when he was around 8 years old, told me to stop. And how that happened was, I'll just sort of go into some detail about that, because when you are gambling, you don't think about the impacts, you don't think about the legacy harms, you don't think about the things that will happen when you do stop, because you don't have time for it. Everything's about gambling. When I did stop and I got my counselling from Beacon, who were amazing, as I always say, things started to really hit home about how am I going to pay my debt, all this time I've lost with my family, my situation with work, the impact it had on my wife has affected my children. I didn't comprehend it at the time because I just didn't think about it. But it all came sort of crashing in, and that was difficult. And that's something I wanted to mention, because that is obviously an offshoot of harms, and it happens, and we have to be ready for that. But what happened was, I was pretty much well into my gambling addiction when my son found out, and or must have known something wasn't right, because I was betting on an iPad. I was on a roulette on one of the sites, betting probably 150, 200 pounds bets on red or black, losing money quite rapidly. I think it was an afternoon, I'd been drinking a bit of wine, it was quite heavy. And he came in the room and he just looked at me. He looked a little bit, I suppose, dishevelled, a little bit not himself, and he just looked at me and he said, "Would you stop doing that, please? It needs to stop." And I can't tell you what that did at that point. Initially I didn't take it in. I'd always tried to say that I was just on a game, it was just something that, that you get on iPads, an app or something. When he said that, it really rocked me. It felt like it was hit me right in the ribs, and it's something that never went away. When that happened, I burst into tears. I was really upset. He left the room at that point, but I think what was difficult was understanding that somebody knew when I tried to keep it so secret. And I wonder how he knew. I wonder what had made him think that. Was it me just being having more of a bad temper, or maybe being ratty, or maybe not spending the normal time that I would, or maybe there was just signs that I didn't know he was looking and could see. Soon after that I stopped, and I was already lost a lot of money, and I was contemplating stuff, but that was the kind of the final straw for me, and that made me stop about 2 weeks after. He was very much a part of me, I suppose, understanding that actually what I'm doing is damaging people, and the fact that he could see that, the fact that what had that done to him, I didn't know. Was it worrying him? Did he feel upset? Was he talking to people about it? So I stopped, and I got help from Beacon, who were brilliant with me and put me on the right track. I think the reason I want to say this today, and I've mentioned this story a few times, is that I think no matter how difficult it is, or no matter how much you're into it, and how you think you might be keeping it quiet, what I'd like to say is that it might not always be the case, and I think there is signs. There's definitely signs when someone's gambling. You need to look out for those things and spot them early on, because they can be the difference with someone going down this journey, being affected by mental health, losing money, potentially losing work. And it is things like being more sort of distracted, more away, not wanting to do things, maybe not being involved, not in looking at stuff and not actually enjoying it, if that makes sense, not eating normally. There's lots of different things, but that did change me, and that made me stop, and that made me get the help, and then made me carry on now to sort of help others. But I think it's important to know that your journey, with your journey, you're not on your own, and remember that people, even though they may not understand, will want to help, and be mindful that people will know something's not right, and that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because it made me the difference, and it made me stop, and it could make others stop. So if this has helped anyone at all, if this has resonated, if this makes sense, or if you know people that may be going through that, or you think they are, then say something, do something. But ultimately, I still have my family now, and I'm very lucky. And I talked to him about everything that I do now, all the support that I did, but without that happening, I may have not been here today. I may have gone down a very different path. But it did give me a very much understanding that actually, even though we think it's something that you can't see, maybe you can. So I just want to appreciate and say thanks to everyone for listening, and Have a great rest of the conference and have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are we continuing the theme of lived experience? I nearly forgot. Continuing the theme of lived experience, I'd like to introduce George Parris, who's a lived experience advocate with Bethnal Moore, and he's going to talk about, he's previously a professional footballer with West Ham, and he's going to talk about his experience and what led him to seek involvement, support and treatment. Welcome, George.
Am I on this one or on that one?
Not on that one, unless you want to sit and...
Testing. No, all good. Thank you, everyone. I'm on the graveyard slot, as you can see. Everyone's waiting to go to lunch, or some people nodding off, and etc. So I'll keep it brief. But yeah, thanks for the introduction. So background for myself. So I'm George Parris Jr. So my dad was senior. So I was born in Barking, for those who know where that is in Essex. So some people think I'm mad, but actually I'm not. But so I was the baby of 4 kids. Mum and dad. Mum was from Trinidad, dad was from Barbados. So we obviously had the West Indian culture growing up. So some of my first experiences of life, I suppose, was in and around dominoes. For those, that was a Caribbean way of cards, even marbles to some extent. You know, that was how it was growing up. So other experiences was obviously football and all sports. I was really, really good at all sports, and we always used to go over the park, multicultural road. Within that, there was obviously West Indian, Chinese, Irish, you name it, we were there. So growing up, we were just a family. So I know we're talking about family today. So there wasn't that, what should I say, the fact that I was black. So I didn't actually realise that I was black until I went to secondary school, where obviously, where the older lads, and we had a, I'll just briefly mention about this. There was a bully. I know that everyone has bullies at school. And this particular bully one day called me a black bee, which I took on board. And when I went home, I tried to explain to my mum what that was. And she said, well, yeah, he was partly right. You are black, but you're not a bee because you know your dad, even though my mum and dad had split up and been divorced when I was about 5 or 6. And then a year or two later, this same bully, he said something to my very close friend who passed away a long, long while ago. He was an Indian boy who had a wasting disease. And I don't know why, for that particular occasion, I just saw red, and I'm not proud of it, but I gave him a right good hiding. And that's the only time that I've actually physically punched or hit anyone. So I had to learn from that experience. I know we're talking about gambling, but with gambling, I didn't learn from my experience. So growing up, we used to play cards. Even when I went to sleepovers with my schoolmates, and even when I was going through my my career at football with the youth team for West Ham, for those who know West Ham, that little team down London way. So yeah, it was always part of my life, although my brothers and sisters never gambled. And then when I started work, so I got an apprenticeship at West Ham just after leaving school. And then even in that environment, we gambled. So when we used to go to away games on the coach, we used to have a game of cards. So everyone knew that I gambled, but no one knew to what extent. And then that gradually got worse and worse, although in my career went upwards and onwards. Earned more money, in which case, obviously, I then spent more money on gambling. It started to take effect when I met my present, or my first wife. So then we had a family as well. So I wasn't just looking after myself. I was meant to be looking after my family. But at that stage, I didn't really look after them that well. So all the money that I was earning a lot of money then, I was spending in the betting shop. So back in those days, for those who are a little bit younger in the room, we used to have to physically go to the betting shop. So that's what I used to do. And I did that throughout my career. And I suppose the big S didn't hit the fan until 96, where I had to hold my hand up and I had to explain to my wife that I had spent all the money that we had earned. At that stage, I'd already moved from West Ham to Birmingham for about 150,000, which in those days was a lot of money. Sort of like now, it's just pocket money in relation to football. But I was earning well over £100,000 a year, so a lot of money back in the 90s. So then when we moved from Birmingham to Brighton, I'd lost all the money, so we had a 4-bed semi in Solihull. And then moving from Birmingham to Brighton, I had to explain to my wife that actually it might be better for us to actually rent somewhere in Brighton. So she didn't actually know that we didn't have any money. And I say, got to 96, I held my hand up. At the time, I thought that was going to be my last bet. So back then, we didn't have any help at all. I know Frankie's in the room. He helped me later on, and I did a placement there. Thank you for that, Frankie, by the way. So there wasn't that help when I was first put my hand up. So I had to go in and see the then manager at Brighton, and all he just said, well, OK, you just have to deal with it and get on with it. But I didn't deal with it, and I stopped gambling for about 3 or 4 years, and then I had a slip or relapse, whatever you want to call it. And the fact is, when you have a relapse, for those who've been there themselves, you go in at the same level that you finished. So as opposed to obviously betting £20 a race, I was betting £50 and £100, not even looking at these particular races and just putting one bet on after the other. So luckily for me, and I didn't think so at the time, I got chucked out of the house 2005. And that was my, if you like, my light bulb moment. Not being able to wake up with my kids, so I had 2 kids by then. So if I was honest, at the time I really hated my wife for it, or my ex-wife, but I actually hated myself more than that. So the next weeks and months and then years were really hard to recovery. So, because everyone talks about trust, don't we? And I didn't even trust myself. But I can now stand here in front of you. I can talk about my last bet, hopefully. So that was 10th of February 2005. So you can imagine I don't know if this still happens. I'm in the betting shop looking at the form on a virtual horse race. And I've looked up and I've decided that I've got £1 left, so I'm going to back the first favourite to beat the second favourite. Yeah. So can you imagine it? So all those people will go to a race night. It's just a film, isn't it? So I'm watching there in the betting shop, £1 straight forecast. The race has started. The favourite's got stuck in the stall. The second favourite's is gone well ahead, so they're like that, as you can imagine it, as in, on the photos, etc. And then the favourite got beat by a head. Yeah, so that was me. I had to walk out of the smoky betting shop back home and try and explain to the wife that I had no money. As I say, luckily for me, she chucked me out of the house, and I'm now able to stand here in front of you and talk about that experience. I'd like to thank loads of people along the way who helped me. As I said, Frankie's obviously helped me later on. I did my placement there. Ian at the back. So I did my placement with Ian as well, and I now work for Break Even. I just think with all gamblers, I think primarily, majority of them are hard workers as well. I don't think we're bad people. I just think we make the bad choice. So my choice today is to stand here and talk in front of you. And in regards to, I suppose, I talk about my later life. So then I'm a mature student, a very mature student. So I went on to do all my coaching badges so I can coach anywhere in Europe on the football side of stuff. retrained and became a therapeutic counsellor. I also done a diploma, and I'm now doing a postgrad with the LMA. So, yeah, long may that continue. And yeah, I'd like to thank you for listening, and hopefully we can all get in there, have some sausage rolls and Scotch eggs, etc. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
George, for sharing that with us. I realised that in my introduction I'd done a transfer of you from break even to bet no more, and no money exchanged hands, I can assure you. But I'm sorry about that. I should have introduced you as a lived experience advocate from break even. Okay. To finish up the conference, then Neil is going to finish us off, and thank you very much for your patience and attendance. And I shall hand back over to Neil.
Thanks, Dave. Conscious of time, just slightly overrunning, and I'm mindful of getting people away and their commitment to the conference today. There's been so many different issues here that we can reflect on that were critically important, but from a Merseyside perspective, and there's an awful lot of people from Merseyside here today, if we look at Nadia's presentation, she said that about 11% of the Liverpool population, sorry, the Merseyside population, were on that risk continuum, for lower risk to higher risk. Now, by my calculations, that from population of Merseyside, that works out to be about 170,000. But it does not include the affected others. Now, when you throw into the affected others equation, is that will go up to, I would say, conservatively, maybe about 300,000. Okay? Now, when we look at the numbers that we get into support services, that doesn't even engage with that figure at all. So if there's one figure maybe to reflect on, maybe it's that. Now, right in my opening sort of address, I said a whole family approach is in reality a whole system approach. And this is about Beacon being a free repository of information and skills. And with your assistance to allow for us to work with you as experts in your field to effect a knowledge and skills transfer. And that is our invitation. Our invitation is for you to contact us, to contact the team, to contact Ian and Lauren in particular, and Dave, to maybe consider joining our stakeholder group, to maybe consider what your needs are for us to help you to embed the issue of gambling-related harm within your organisation and your touch points within the community. And from then on in, it just leaves me really to thank the speakers for today. I think they've been absolutely amazing from my perspective. I hope you feel the same. You know, the academics, the clinicians, and I'm not going to name them all, you know, they've been absolutely fantastic today. In particular, the bravery of our lived experience individuals that have had the strength to get up today and to talk about their experiences and to why we need to adopt that whole family approach. And then finally, something like today doesn't happen by accident. So I've got to thank the Beacon team. Now, whether they come out of here with swell heads, as we call as a little Liverpool term, but I cannot go away from today without thanking Ian Whiteside, who's put so much into this, and Lauren Campbell, without whom today just would not have worked. So my thanks to the whole team. And they can go out with their heads as big as they want. Right, okay. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you all, guys. There's a lovely lunch on. You know, I know the standards here are excellent. Can I encourage you to have some lunch, to network, to talk to people, and follow up with anything that you need through the Q&R code, which I think is going to be up there shortly. Please contact us, and you will get a virtual instantaneous response. Thank you.